Video games are as fun as they are because they challenge the players in different ways. However, some games go above and beyond with this concept to the point where some of us end up pulling out all of our hair out of frustration. And with a year like 2023, which was full of incredible video games, of course there are those that just truly push us to our limits in terms of difficulty. So in this episode, we're going to dive down into the hardest games of 2023. Before that though, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one. Also, don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, you can support NerdSpace now directly by becoming a Stars member. Just head over to my channel's page and click that join button and help me continue to do this full time while also receiving some pretty cool perks. Anyway, my name is Ruben with NerdSpace Games, and this is my top 10 hardest video games of 2023. Let's get it. Number 10, Blasphemous 2. While some might argue if this game is hard enough or not to crack this list, one thing's for certain. Blasphemous 2 is hands down one of the most disturbing games of 2023. Disturbing or not though, I find Blasphemous 2 to be one of the most difficult Metroidvania games of 2023. Basically, it takes a side-scroller game and sprinkles some Soulsborne difficulty in there that forces the player to time their dodges and retrieve their skills after death. Players must battle their way through difficult enemies with high health bars, boss fights that keep you on your toes, and plenty of obstacles in your way to stop you from completing this game. Not to mention that getting lost in this world is extremely easy, meaning more times than not, you'll find yourself backtracking way more than you need to. This of course causes you to fight against obnoxious enemies over and over again, while the lack of variety with regular enemies makes it easy to learn ways to defeat them quickly and therefore makes it slightly less challenging. There are moments throughout the game that prove to be extremely difficult and will cause you to die and scream out of frustration over and over again until you finally get that victory, especially with some of the grueling boss fights of Blasphemous 2. Overall, it's a perfect game to start off the list for the hardest games of 2023. Number 9, Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Ignoring the difficulty of trying to complete this game at launch because of the technical issues, Jedi Survivor is without a doubt one of the more challenging games of 2023. Just like its predecessor before it, Jedi Survivor takes a lot of inspiration from Soulsborne, a concept that you'll probably hear me repeat a lot in today's video. With challenging optional bosses like the Rancor to the main story's boss fights, Jedi Survivor will push you to your edge with the amount of time you'll find yourself dying. Even a fully upgraded Cal Kestis will still find himself being outdone multiple times throughout the game due to confrontations against the bounty hunters or extremely obnoxious droids. Luckily, the game can be made easier if you become too frustrated thanks to Jedi Survivor having easier difficulty levels, unlike some games on this list. Still, anything about Jedi Padawan will still challenge the player enough to make you rethink your skills as a Jedi Knight. Number 8, Aliens Dark Descent. Dark Descent making this list might be due to my own lack of experience when it comes to dealing with real-time tactics games. Full disclosure, I've only recently started to dabble in this genre, mainly due to this game as I'm a huge horror movie fan. So obviously I love me some Alien. With that being said, despite the really long tutorial, I found myself completely overwhelmed in the first major boss fight. Seriously, it took me over 10 hours to fully complete the first main mission of the game. The game challenges you to lead a 4-man squad of Marines as you battle through swarms of xenomorphs. More often than not, you'll find yourself in situations where you will be outnumbered 5-1. Not to mention, these creatures are pretty brutal and they will drain your health quickly. With that in mind, you'll have to use special abilities and equipment to take down the aliens as soon as possible or risk losing your squad. Also, the game is a roguelike experience, as if you lose your soldiers in battle, you'll lose them forever. This means that after putting in so much hard work to fully upgrade a character, you could lose all of that progress if they die in battle. So between so many strategy techniques that you'll need to master in order to survive and the potential loss of your best soldiers, Aliens Dark Descent proves to be one of the most challenging and vicious games of 2023. Number 7, Remnant 2. It's not often I would recommend players start a game by first playing on the easiest difficulty, but in the case of Remnant 2, that might not be such a bad idea. That's because Remnant 2's normal difficulty is on the level of, say, some of your favorite Soulsborne games, but with guns. Still, regardless of the difficulty you play Remnant 2 on, you'll find it to be really challenging. In this game, you'll travel to different worlds on your journey and you'll come across some truly difficult boss encounters. Most boss fights are similar to the classic Soulsborne combat. Dodge enemy attacks and wait for the perfect window to deal some damage without getting too greedy. But there are a few fights that challenge the player with deciphering puzzles during combat. For example, at one point you battle against a labyrinth full of moving cubes. You'll need to use the pattern that these cubes move in order to avoid their attacks while traversing through the maze. However, nothing's as challenging as the final boss fight of the game, Annihilation. Even on the easiest difficulty, I found myself dying over and over again against him. One thing that helps makes this game easier is the fact that you're able to play with 2 friends though. But even if the game is easier, it still poses enough of a challenge to make this list. Overall though, Remnant 2 proves that Soulsborne games with guns can be just as difficult as those without guns. Number 6, Ghostrunner 2. Ghostrunner 2 is the only game on this list to have one specific key trait. You, as the player, cannot take a single direct hit at all. Doing so will immediately cause you to get a game over. Luckily though, you have a block mechanic that can prevent pretty much every single attack just about. So while you're running through the map, you can actually lift up your sword and block range attacks as well as counter melee attacks. With that being said, there are enemies that can do unblockable attacks. Your only solution to these attacks is pretty much dodging, which requires you to be quick at reacting to different situations. Add those elements to the fact that the game also revolves around parkour and solving puzzles while on the move, and you'll soon realize that this game kind of requires you to dodge, attack, leap, and run constantly to avoid danger and push on through the missions. With challenging boss fights, aggressive enemies, puzzles that need to be solved while in midair, and the fast pace that Ghostrunner 2 is set to, it cracks my list for one of the hardest games of 2023. The only saving grace here with this game is that the checkpoints appear after every single area, making it easier to complete the game through trial and error. Number 5, Wild Hearts. Wild Hearts is EA's attempt at a Monster Hunter world game basically. The player controls a hunter with unique abilities that allows them to create traps and structures to aid them in their combat. Actually, when you put it that way, it's almost like Monster Hunter meets Fortnite. Jokes aside though, as a hunter you'll have to battle some insane creatures, both in size and design. Luckily though, you can call for help from players in the area. Doing so will allow you to have other hunters assist you with taking on these creatures. Unfortunately, getting help is not always guaranteed, as thanks to the player count for this game, there isn't much help being offered to begin with. That aside, the key to success to dealing with these monsters is timing and patience. Learning when to dodge and when to use these abilities to build things that'll assist in different ways will help you get a head start on defeating these creatures. However, with the amount of resources at your disposal, it could take a while before you become familiar with how to handle each attack by these monsters. So this game proves to be a little more difficult early on compared to some of the other entries on this list. Thanks to some extremely hard encounters and some of the really long and dragged out fights of the game, Wild Hearts makes a strong case for being one of the most difficult games of 2023. Number 4, Lies of P. Fans have been demanding a Bloodborne sequel or remake for a while now, and even though we are still waiting for that, Lies of P is a game that can scratch that itch to a certain degree. Set in a dark, steampunk world, we play as Pinocchio, a puppet created by Geppetto. Pinocchio is equipped with many different abilities and weapons to use at his disposal as he takes on different monsters and puppets throughout Crate. I know I've used this term a lot in today's topic, but this game is the true example of a Soulsborne game done right. The difficulty here is top notch, as not only must you time dodges and parries with Pinocchio, but you must also master the art of being adaptable. Different enemies and bosses can be taken down with different strategies. With Pinocchio, you can create multiple different combinations to help improve your odds of taking down that next big puppet boss. For example, Pinocchio can exchange his arm for other arms of different abilities, such as puppet strings that draws enemies in closer to you, or a shield that can block incoming damage. Plus, you can combine handles with different blades to create some devastating combos. Overall, the game is just like any Soulsborne game, as each boss fight will feel different and require a unique strategy to defeat them. Even regular enemies can catch you off guard and take you down with just 1 or 2 strikes. Lies of P proves to be one of the most challenging games due to its constant change in strategies required to advance throughout the game. It shouldn't surprise you one bit to find a game that appears to be a spiritual successor to Bloodborne to make the list for the top 10 hardest games of 2023. Number 3, Wolong Fallen Dynasty. This game is, it's hard. I can easily see why some people might even rank it as the hardest game of 2023. The only reason I'm not doing that is because I had a slightly more difficult time with 2 other games. Actually, I would go as far as saying that these top 3 games on my list are interchangeable depending on your personal skills and preferences in each of these different styles of gameplay. Wo Long combines the Soulsborne combat with the style of the Dynasty warrior games to make it feel kind of similar to Nioh. You, as a soldier, must battle through iconic Chinese soldiers, mythical creatures, and enormous beasts, all in the effort to restore peace in China. The combat here focuses a lot more on perfect blocks and counterattacks and faster combat overall, whereas most Soulsborne games tend to take the route of a slower style of gameplay. As a matter of fact, if you can't master the counterattack, then you'll easily be defeated time and time again. However, just like a lot of games on this list, the enemies of course can do unblockable attacks, which instead requires perfect dodging to get your player in range for a good strong counterattack. The main difficulty of this game though comes down to learning patience and timing, even more so than other Soulsborne games, as it's almost impossible to defeat some bosses without using perfect blocks and counterattacks. Add that to the fact that this game seems to be a little more brutal in terms of the difficulty spikes. Instead of working its way up to hard encounters from the get-go, Wo Long challenges the player to pick up its unique style of combat immediately or get trampled upon early on. For that reason, we see this game crack the top 3 hardest games of 2023. Number 2, Armored Core 6, Fires of Rubicon. Out of every game on this list, Armored Core 6 requires the most adaptable style of gameplay. Unlike most entries here, trying to beat the game while using the same style of fighting throughout the entire game is borderline impossible. While regular enemies throughout most missions won't really pose much of a threat, the real challenge comes when you're face to face against one of the brutal bosses of Armored Core 6. Learning the weaknesses of each of these mechs is key, as you'll need to build your own mech in the effort of trying to counter the brutal onslaught you'll receive from different bosses in this game. For example, some mini bosses and major boss fights have shields, therefore using weapons that can take down the shield faster is ideal. Or another example, you'll come across enemies like helicopters that require you to be quick on your feet, and instead of relying on power, it's more vital you use a faster mech to keep ahead of its attacks to avoid being destroyed. Because of the amount of adaptability that this game requires, it can be hard for some gamers to constantly learn new ways to fight against other mechs, and therefore this game can prove to be one of the most challenging games. A lot of people describe this game as a mech game with Soulsborne combat and difficulty, which is pretty fitting considering the amount of stress this game puts you through. However, unlike most games like Dark Souls, Armored Core 6 requires you to keep an open mind to changing your fighting style throughout the entire experience. Number 1, The Lords of the Fallen. Without a doubt, the hardest game of 2023 for me is Lords of the Fallen. Listen, I'm fairly new to the Soulsborne games. I've only recently jumped into it thanks to Elden Ring. Since then, I've played Demon Souls Remake, Lies of P, and every other Soulsborne game that has came out since 2022. With that being said, I don't think I've ever had a more difficult time than I did with Lords of the Fallen. I honestly don't know why though. Like on paper, this game shouldn't be more difficult than some of the other games I've played, yet it is. While the regular enemies may not pose as much of a threat other than some spikes and difficulties in some areas, the boss fights are what really pushed me to my limit of nearly throwing my controller at my TV. Take the first boss fight of the game, for example, Peta. Thanks to her long range attacks that can swing around and even attack from behind, getting close to her to deal some damage can prove to be pretty difficult. Not to mention that perfect blocks are hard to time correctly compared to other Soulsborne games. Plus, timing dodges are even more difficult this time overall. Even with the allies at my side, I seem to always struggle against the boss fights of the game because of my lack of timing dodges and blocks correctly. With one of the most difficult first boss fights since the Fell Omen of Elden Ring, the amount of difficulty spikes within the game, and the attack patterns of most bosses that make it hard to time blocks and dodges correctly, Lords of the Fallen is 100% the hardest game of 2023. But that does it for this episode. Do you agree with my list, or do you think I missed something completely? Also, in your own opinion, what game do you think is the hardest game of 2023? Put up the comments and let me know. Anyway, if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe for more ranking videos like this one. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.